There is so much noise now, primarily because of social media and the platform it offers everyone, including crappy people with hate ridden ideas they feel they must inflict upon the world for some reason. This can obviously lead to the amplification of lies. People tend to pick a side when they're shouting about politics and social media, which in turn makes more people engage, those that agree and those that don't. The majority of people are less likely to double check if a tweet is true or not if they agree with it. Even elements of the media can latch onto those lies without properly fact checking them. Why? Because the more extreme something is, the more it appears to pick a side, the more likely it is to get clicks, which brings revenue. Social media companies especially want you to engage with their content. When you do, their algorithms will push whatever you've engaged with back into your feed over and over in one form or another. That's called an echo chamber. This leads us to what the media has been calling the big lie, or at least elements of the media. The big lie is the notion that the 2020 election was rigged in favour of Joe Biden and the Democrats over Donald Trump and the Republican Party. For those that don't recall the semantics of this election, Joe Biden received more than 81 million votes, while incumbent Donald Trump got 74 million. Both are a record number of votes for a presidential candidate. Biden won the college electoral by 302 to Trump's 232, passing the 270 votes needed to be elected president. That would seem pretty straightforward, right? Well, for those watching on election night when Trump was in the lead, who went to bed, they woke up to find the tide somehow turning towards Biden. This was primarily down to mail-in ballots, which have been widely used because of the still raging at the time COVID pandemic in America. A huge portion of voters who didn't feel safe standing in line had the option of mailing in their ballot. Analysts on cable news covering the election were generally able to predict, through looking at historic election patterns, what area will vote for which candidate. They also knew there were a lot of mail-in ballots still to come. For Trump, it was and still is difficult for him to fathom that Biden got 7 odd million more votes than he did. This is because Trump and his supporters were looking at the number of people attending his rallies, then looking at the number of people attending Biden's rallies and gauging voter enthusiasm that way. That's something that makes sense to some degree on the surface, but not if you looked at polling or voter intention, although Trump's base has remained strong if you do look at the Republican primaries so far. Those who identified as Democrat were considered way more likely to vote by mail-in ballot, mainly because those who considered themselves Democrat took the pandemic very seriously, or tended to at least. So picture it, Trump wins a couple of states considered competitive, like Florida, which was called relatively early for him. He sees some momentum building and decides to hit the hay. He's a big speech to give tomorrow, possibly. Then he wakes up to those leads gone and Biden now leading more battleground states like Georgia and Arizona, thanks to the now counted mail-in ballots. It's worth bearing in mind that Trump had been saying on the entire run up to election night there was no way he could lose. And if he did lose, it was a fix. He actually said the same thing in 2016, but surprised everyone, himself included, I think, by actually winning the election. So those supporters watched his lead disappear, and Biden was ultimately declared the winner by very cautious network executives. Even Fox News called the battleground state early for Biden, the hotly contested Arizona. The man largely responsible for calling it, Chris Steuerwalt, was promptly fired by Fox News after, although they gave an alternative reason for doing so. All of this is staggeringly important. First, the big lie led to the January 6th attack on the Capitol in Washington. Trump pushed it heavily on his social media, and his more gullible supporters and followers bought it. The supporters with a tendency towards aggression and violence then entered the Capitol building. They were pissed off the election had been stolen from Trump, and in their eyes, Joe Biden was an illegitimate president. Still is to some. This has led to Republican candidates in the upcoming midterm election continuing to push the big lie because they know they'll get some of the base. If enough of those candidates were to win on November 8, it could have devastating consequences for American democracy, not just in 2022, but in 2024 when the presidential election takes place. Trump and his team also pursued multiple legal avenues in a desperate attempt to overturn the election, with over 60 being thrown out of court. With the former president facing his own legal woes, he may find himself backed into a corner and forced to run again in 2024. Do we think he'd take another possible loss to Joe Biden or somebody else? Well, MAGA Republicans in battleground states in charge of counting the votes would likely not be as loyal to the election processes as their predecessors were. Watch closely on November 8. The fallout could be felt around the world.